pray, we'll start. Thank you, Father, for your blessing on the weekend. Thank you for the privilege of serving in a variety of ways. Thank you for a new week. And as we are starting to sense the conclusion of the semester coming, we pray for health, strength, for endurance that we need in these final few weeks. Pray that you would help us to learn, to grow, and to remain steadfast right up to the end. Thank you for your faithful love, unchanging nature. We commit our week to you in this class specifically. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty, food and eating customs. I'll just be honest with you. I don't recognize half of those. I don't know who are the food connoisseurs here that know this stuff. I don't. This is Taste Atlas, European street food map. I really don't recognize most of those. Anybody here tried any of these? I mean, breakfast roll. Okay, I think I get that one. Fish and chips. Yeah, we went to London like back in 2012. We had fish and chips, and it was absolutely delicious. Let's see. Anybody recognize any of these other ones? Euros. Right there. Yep, got that one. Where's the hot dog? This? Yeah, Pulsar. I don't know. I've never done a study on the history of hot dogs to know, exactly where they originated. I mean, that's some kind of a wrap. Yeah. Pretzel? That looks familiar. Maybe it's just the names of some of them. I don't know. Making you hungry? If you missed breakfast this morning? Yeah. Yeah. It almost kind of looks like going into Panera Bread. They've come up with so many different ones that I don't recognize now, but yeah. So why am I pausing on this? To make you hungry? No, because as we mentioned at the end of last class period, food is a huge extension of their culture. And in fact, in most cultures of the world, sitting down and eating a meal constitutes a really great opportunity for bonding and conversation. And that's true more in some places than others. Okay, get this on now. So, sorry, guys. How is silverware used? Continental versus North American dining. Okay, somebody kind of fill me in on North American dining, all right? Anybody ever done a study of the history of the use of silverware? Why do we have a fork, a knife, and a spoon? Is it purely practical, or are there other things going on in the background? When you set the table, how fussy are you about the order that the silverware goes? I see a head going, no, I see one. Yeah. Do you care whether you put, I was taught you put the fork by itself on the left side and then the knife and the spoon on the right. Is that, anybody? Okay, some of you have, yeah. And then I've gone to some places where there's three, all on one side. And then you've been to some places where you get like three different forks. One of them's the salad fork, one of them's the main course fork, and the other one's the dessert fork. And I end up, if I go to a fancy place like that, I always end up just using one fork for everything anyway. Not because I just usually just forget to change it and I don't see. When you finish using your knife, do you lay it across the plate, or do you put it on the plate and the other end on the table? Does that matter to you? Is there anybody that says, no, it's not good to put to leave the knife straddling the plate? There are people that believe that's bad etiquette. You put the knife across the edge of the plate. You don't lean it down on the table. Okay? Not a big deal where most of you came from. I tried putting it on across the plate. The problem is it keeps falling off. So I figured, okay, let's just, and I usually look around. If I'm eating somewhere, I look around the table and try to see how everybody else is doing, especially the host. And, whatever they do is fine. So you say, well, that's silly. It really isn't. I mean, it may be in some contexts, but the whole science of silverware and how it's used is quite fascinating. Now this, this is just a stock photo. Two different spoons, and sometimes it depends on what you're having, okay? And then we'll get to cultures where you don't even see this stuff. You either see chopsticks or you see nothing at all, like India. Here's your silverware right here, okay? Yeah, you like that? Wait a minute, you're not from India. You do that here? Not in Benson, maybe, huh? But at home? It's fascinating. It really is. This is just one of those incidental things that we don't even think of. We just do it, but it does have significance, and especially in parts of Latin Europe. Okay, Europe. The fork is in the left hand, and both hands hold the utensils tines down. You understand, right? I should have brought some silverware with me. I was taught that if you stab, your piece of meat with your fork with the tines down and stick it in your mouth that way, it's considered, rude, crude. Okay, in America, you might stab it that way, but you always turn it. I shouldn't say always, but typically we turn it over so that when you put it in your mouth, the tines are up instead of eating it with tines down like this. Why were the tines held down in Latin Europe? Is it just a thing, or is there some kind of historical significance to that? Well, in some historical situations, the tines up is considered to be aggressive. Tines down, you keep the pointed part, the sharp part of the fork facing down, so it's not a threat. So why would it be a threat? Well, notice both hands hold the utensils. When you eat, what are you told? I'm assuming, okay, that you probably eat with one hand, right? And what do you do with the other hand? Yeah, yeah, Paul goes like this. Now, it's probably not what we're supposed to do, right? Depending, meet Benson. But typically, what's the other hand supposed to do? Goes under the table on your lap, right? Did you ever hear your parents say, get your elbows off the table? See, in our culture, it's okay to put your forearm on the table, but not your elbow. Again, if you're at home on Saturday morning and you're in your pajamas, then, you might do that. But typically, no. Why don't Europeans want their hand under the table? That's considered out of bounds. Why do they want a utensil in each hand?
So you don't stab the other person?
Mm-hmm. Some very offensive things have happened under the table if you're sitting next to someone you don't like. A little poke or stab. And so having both hands up on the table shows everybody that you're not doing anything you shouldn't be doing under the table to somebody next to you. I'm not talking about moral. I'm talking about stabbing some. Well, I guess that's moral. But you know what I'm saying. I'm talking about using your. In fact, in some cultures in Europe, when you set the table and you put a steak knife on the table, you have to be very careful that the blade, the sharp part of the blade, is facing toward the plate and not outward toward your neighbor. For that same reason. In some cultures, especially in the past, the blade, the sharpened blade pointing out is a sign of aggression against the person sitting next to you. In fact, for whatever reason, when I set the table, even if it's a butter knife, I always make sure that the blade is pointing in toward the plate. It's just, with me, it's just, what do you call it when you're constantly arranging things and straightening pictures and all that? That's kind of my, but there is some history behind that. Yeah, both hands have to be occupied and visible. The fork switches hands. Why do you do that? Why do you, some of you hold your fork in your left hand, you pick up your knife and you cut it, you put the knife down, and then you switch hands and eat. Why don't you just pick it up with, you've already got the fork in your left hand, why not just cut with the knife and then eat with your left hand? Why do we put the knife down and switch hands? Emma?
I mean, for me, I'm not as coordinated with my left hand. I mean, it's not that difficult, but like, it just feels weird to do stuff with.
Okay, all right. But it's possible that part of the reason it feels weird is because you grew up with, learning to do it that way. I don't know. It might be, yeah. Paul?
In Congo, like if you're a left-hand writer,
Yeah.
you're considered as like your writings are not properly, even if it's really nice. So when Barack Obama became president of the United States, he was left-handed. They made a law that doesn't matter if you're left-handed or right-handed, your work still counts the same as the right-handed.
Interesting.
So for forks, might be someone else who came with the idea, or a king. It's like, okay, everybody should be using forks.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Kind of a prejudice against left-handed people originally. Yeah, that's interesting. There are theories out there as to why we do the hand switching thing. I'm not sure what it is. I don't think it has anything to do with a prejudice against left-handed people. And I've never found something that is totally convincing as to why we do that. Yeah, left hand remains under the table and the tines are up. Part of the issue in our country is that we made this fast westward frontier movement, right? And on the frontier, a lot of etiquette relaxed that may have been true in the big cities on the east, and all that. As people went out and found their freedom, and they got out of the cities and moved west, a lot of them relaxed these and I've never seen where it's okay in our country to stab your meat with your knife and put it in your mouth. I mean, you got to really be, that hasn't gotten that far. But our country has emphasized, freedom and loosening up of things. So, anyway, people in the medieval era were concerned about not looking threatening at the dinner table, as we mentioned. Okay, Louis the 14th demanded the use of rounded knives as forks came into being. He was a little concerned about aggression, all right? And so he didn't allow the sharpened knives. So what do you do if you have, beef? Well, you just better make sure it's tender, I mean, you guys have been to restaurants where the beef is so tender that you don't actually get a sharpened steak knife. You can actually use just a serrated knife or something to cut it or whatever. Yeah. American hand switching could be from the pioneers who lacked forks and used spoons instead. Apparently, in the olden days, there was forks, weren't originally used. I mean, think about it. On the frontier, they would be harder to make, for one thing. Making forks with the individual, that would be more difficult to do. So they may have just used knives and spoons, and so I don't know. Again, these are, notice the could be. A lot of this is just theory. All right. A more important distinction is a level of formality. How formal are you at the table? So all of this other stuff is interesting to think about, but the bottom line, if you're adjusting to another culture, is how do I avoid offending somebody by being too informal or maybe stifling a conversation by being too formal? It could go either direction. Americans are more informal. We have the pioneer spirit, while Europeans are more formal. There's an interesting contrast between French and French Canadians. French Canadians would be, more informal, even though they're French. Because of the influence of North America, they've become less formal. In fact, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, if we would see somebody being very formal, tucking in the napkin under here, there would almost be a tendency on our part as kids to almost snicker at them. When somebody was that puffy, we would view that almost as being, and which is wrong to do, but I'm just saying that that was something very easy to do in our culture. Americans eat to live, often on the go, but Europeans live to eat. Now, are there fast food restaurants in Europe? Of course there are. But, and so again, this is a stereotypical statement, but for Americans, usually, just like I walked in this morning and I had my mouth full and I said, good morning to you guys. And I walked up here and I said, I had a choice, just, wolf down that nice warm or wait until, after class and eat it. Well, I'm in American school. We're more relaxed. It's casual week. We're all dressing casual. So I wolfed it down and came into class with my mouth still chewing the last bite of that, okay? That's an illustration of what's happening here. We Americans eat to live. It's more pragmatic. It's utilitarian and not so much the art of eating that it is in some other places. Excuse me. In Europe, a meal is an event, and that's the thing you have to keep in mind. If you're being invited over, it's not just to kill your appetite. I'm going to speak very bluntly. A lot of times for Americans, I just got to do something to kill my appetite. I need some energy. Okay, it's very, very practical. But in Europe, it's an event. It means more than that. It's an occasion where we talk, we share, we learn about each other, and we bond. Yeah, the idea of servers not bringing the bill until you request it, that is also true in Brazil. Of course, Brazil is Latin America, so there are a lot of things about the two that are the same. I remember going to Brazil and I'm wondering, why isn't the server coming? My wife and I went out for her birthday Thursday night, and they bring the bill. They kind of know how to time it. And what do they always say when they bring the bill to you? No rush, just whenever you're ready. Okay, but they take the initiative to let you know that they're at your service. In Latin America and some in Latin Europe and some Latin American countries, the servers will stand away at a distance, and they'll just be standing there, and they're waiting for you to give them the signal. It could be this. In Brazil, we would do this, ready for the, and then they'll come over because they consider it rude. They feel like they're pushing you out of the restaurant, and they don't want you that. They want you to enjoy the event. And so they stay back in the shadows until you give them the signal to bring the bill. Interesting. Most French still buy fresh bread daily, baked on site. And that's not just true of the French. One of the things that we missed about Latin America was that Brazil was that. Not going down and, in some countries, if you don't get to the bakery by like 6:30 in the morning, you missed it. People will get up early and get to the bakery and buy fresh, hot bread for breakfast. And if you're not there by 6:30 or 7 o'clock, it's too late. The good stuff is gone. Yeah. Any of you like to bake bread? You like bread? You use a bread machine, or you do it in the oven, or? Yeah. That's cool. I remember when they first came out with those bread machines. They looked like R2D2. They had the dome on it and everything. And one of our missionary colleagues brought one down. Everybody's standing around, watching that thing work. Now they've been around a long time. Even at a to-go restaurant, fast food is usually eaten inside rather than taken out. Again, that's an overstatement, but a lot of times you will, and that's true in Japan, by the way, too. If you go to a McDonald's, you'll probably find that there's not a drive-through window. You buy it inside and you sit down and you eat it. Again, not always. So some tips when traveling in Latin European countries. Okay, do we know what all those are? That is, anybody been to the Eiffel Tower? You been there?
Yeah.
Cool, been up in it?
No, we didn't have time because it was a long line.
Okay. Cool. I'm assuming there's an elevator going up there. I've never. And this? Leaning Tower of Pisa. Been there, anybody? In Italy? This, of course, the Colosseum, which actually was built. Sometimes I like to use this like when I'm teaching Romans, but it was actually built around 71 or 2 after Paul was already dead and gone. And then this? Big Ben. Anybody been to England? That's my roots. My wife and I are considering next year when we celebrate our 40th, considering taking a trip to England. We want to do some research on Ancestry.com or whatever, and then go over there and try to find our roots. Big Ben. And I do not know what's in the background. I'm assuming they're the Alps, but I'm not sure. So try speaking in their language, even if you're clumsy and criticized. And again, if you're, again, not to be disrespectful to the French, but they have a reputation. If you're in France, you're probably going to find you meet up with a little bit more resistance if you don't speak well. Don't let that stop you. And I hope that you would decide never to be a missionary in France because you don't want to have to encounter that. You know, just God has ways of humbling us no matter where we go. B, don't make demands when shopping. Ask for help. Yeah, Europeans like it when you ask them for help. Dress up before heading to a restaurant. Don't go in shorts and flip-flops. Some places might not even let you in. Don't be in a rush. Man, that's our biggest problem. If you're planning to go out to a restaurant in Europe with somebody, especially somebody from there, don't have anything else planned for the evening. See? So I took my wife on, then we went to a show. I took her to Lion King down at Civic Center. And so, but I tried to leave plenty of time, ahead. In European countries, if you plan something else afterwards and you eat just to, get done and get to wherever you're going, that could be a problem. Eat everything with a utensil and stress good manners. Something else you ever gone to a restaurant, especially if you've been to Latin Europe or Latin America, they have a napkin holder, but the quote unquote napkins are waxy. Anybody been to a restaurant where they serve like that? And I remember thinking, and again, I'm talking Brazil, but this is something that they have in common with Latin Europe. I remember being critical and thinking, these are ridiculous because, it's waxy, it doesn't take anything off. I'm sitting there and I'm criticizing their napkins. What I didn't realize is that those were not designed for you to use to wipe your hands off. They were designed for you to grab and use to grab your burger or whatever so that you didn't have to touch it directly with your hands. So, the joke was on me because I thought that they were cheap, useless napkins when actually they were a tool that you were to use to keep so you didn't have to touch the food directly with your hands. See? So a lot of that kind of thing happens. You see things and you kind of draw conclusions and you want to be sure that you know why is that there, what is that used for. Don't refuse a dining invitation. Only intimate friends invite to a meal in their homes. I mean, if you get an invitation to someone's home in Latin Europe, man, consider that a high honor, okay? Usually it's to a fine restaurant. But when invited to a home, politely decline the first time and then accept the second. This is a tough one. There's this little art, this little game you have to play. I call it a game, but it's a serious thing. In America, if somebody invites you over and say, oh, no thanks, I appreciate it, okay, they're probably not going to insist. And they're certainly not going to be offended by you saying no. And you're not going to be offended if they don't ask you again, right, in general. But that's not true in that. And again, that is something that's true in both Latin Europe and Latin America. I was told by somebody in Argentina, you could ask Tricia about this, that in some countries, you actually are supposed to decline twice and make the person insist the third time and then accept the invitation. It's considered impolite to say, oh, sure, the first time. So if somebody invites you, if you're visiting Europe and somebody invites you over to their home, say, oh, thanks, I really appreciate that, but no, I can't. Oh, yeah, come on, we'd love to have you. Well, okay, I will, thanks. You're not lying, it's just part of the ethical game. If you say, oh, yeah, thanks, the first time around, they might feel a little bit blown back by that, like, this guy's kind of forward, So that's part of the, and again, this is a very general statement. And sometimes the difference is between what's rural and what's urban and how they do things. Urban places, remember, tend to be more globalized, more westernized, more influenced by Western culture. So that's something you'll want to keep in mind. Any of you been to in a situation like that where you were expected to say no the first time you've been? They don't do that in Africa, do they, Paul?
If they give you something,
Yeah.
you just take it.
Yeah. G, don't discuss business until after the meal. Yeah. So what do you discuss? At a meal. Things that we call what here in America? Small talk, right? Politics, maybe especially if you're a foreigner, don't bring up politics. If they want to bring it up, that's fine, but don't you. Because number one, you probably will not understand their politics like they do. And number two, you might not agree with them on politics. So you might have 2 strikes against you right away if you bring up politics, okay? But, and again, why don't you bring up business right away? We've talked about this kind of before. Why not bring up, yeah. Yeah. And they might think that you're sizing them up. How important are you in society? You know, it depends on my business. If their business isn't something that's big and really prosperous, they might feel like you're looking down at them. So talk about family, talk about maybe sports if there's a game going on or something, or whatever. But don't talk about business, even if the purpose is a business gathering. Even if you're being invited over because they want to talk to you about a potential business deal, even then you wait. Don't jump right into it, but nurture the relationship, and then you'll sense, when it's right to do that.
I was just going to say, we have some family friends who are French and some family friends who are Czech, and for both of them, they invite people over a lot, but it's always very much like, even if there's a ton of kids, it's like everyone sits down and eats the meal together, even if there's something else on the agenda. It's very slow and relaxed.
Is that here, or are you talking about there?
It's at home, but
yeah.
There's a French family and a Czech family.
That's it. Yep, that's right. How do the kids do when they all sit down? They pretty well behaved, or yeah. Yep. I went to a restaurant with my wife in Brazil once, and there was a man there eating with his son. His son looked like he was maybe junior high age and middle school age. And I was impressed. They were sitting there, both took their napkins, and tucked them in, and they were very, careful about how they went. And this is just a father and son just out for probably a dad night, and yet they're probably a little bit more upper class, in Brazil. For one thing, the restaurant they were eating at, the poor probably wouldn't have been able to afford it. Here in the States, it's getting more and more difficult to afford even fast food, isn't it? Man, it's just, you go out to eat now, and you can't hardly eat without paying, $10-12 a plate. It's just yeah. Paying the bill usually equals prestige. So one thing you don't want to do in this culture is say, I'll take the bill when here, sometimes we kind of consider it an honor when the server comes say, I got that. No. I thank you for inviting me out, but I do this. And we said, well, thanks. That's really nice of you. You do that there, and they will be highly offended. Because for you to take the bill is for you to steal the honor of being the host. See, and you don't want to do that. So don't even make a gesture in that way. Let them handle the bill. Your job is to be thankful and to show great appreciation. Say, man, that was so kind of you. Thank you very much. Let them handle that. Yep. And you don't have to say afterwards, hey, we'll have to have you over sometime. We'll have to take you out sometime. Don't worry about that. Don't have to do that. Okay? And then enjoy the meal. What if I don't like the food? Eat it and smile anyway. You'll probably enjoy it. And look, most people, if they know you're American, they might even ask you, Americans typically don't like this stuff here. You might want to choose something else. They're sensitive to that, and they're not going to order for you. They're not going to choose your. But if they invite you to their home, okay. Now again, this gets back to something we said a few weeks ago. If you have allergies, you're lactose intolerant or gluten-free, make sure that if you accept an invitation to someone's home, that you tell them that immediately. Say, one thing you should know, I'm not able to eat gluten, because of. Let me tell you this, though. We had a student here several years ago that she had horrible, horrible problems with. She could look at milk and it would just, she'd get in trouble. But she went to Asia, and when she was in Asia, she could drink all the milk she wanted. So there was something about the treatment, the processing of the milk here, and if you're into that, you probably understand that better than I do. But when she went there, it wasn't an issue. I don't know if it's hormones, you know anything about that, anybody up on that sort of thing?
It's like the type of cow, because here it's A1, like their genetics, and over there they're A2. So like my grandparents, they just have like a hobby farm. But my grandma has bred their cows so they produce all A2 type milk, so it doesn't affect people with lactose allergies.
Interesting. This is probably over my head, but can you explain what A1 and A2 means?
I don't know for sure. I just know it's with like the cow's genetics.
Okay, something about the genetics of the cow. That's fascinating. So A1 cows are more of an American thing, but not so much overseas?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think it's just the way that everything is like mass produced here, like even their cows. They just don't take the time to produce the different genetics. So some of them will be like A1, A2, but it still will affect people with lactose intolerance.
Wow, I have never heard that before. That's really cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm guessing it's probably quite expensive to do the genetics and to breed them, as A2 cows.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks. That's amazing. But I'm just saying, if you do have an issue that, and you know that, make sure you tell the host up front. Don't wait until you're sitting at the table. Then it gets really awkward. Good. All right. Most of these are values that are true in Israel as well. Remember we talked about, why Israel in this cluster? Well, most of these things that we're talking about here would apply in an Israeli culture. All right. Okay, well, let's switch then and talk a little bit about Latin America. And of course, okay, most countries in Latin America are daughters of Spain, the only exception being Brazil. And somehow when the Pope got involved in establishing lines between what belongs to Spain, what belongs to Portugal, and all of that, Brazil ended up with this great big huge, one big piece of land, and Spain divided theirs up. And I'm not into all of the history and politics behind that, but that's essentially why Brazil got to be as big. You may be aware that there's actually more Portuguese spoken in Latin America than there is Spanish, just because of the sheer size of Brazil. Yeah, but in terms of world influence, there's no doubt that Spanish is far more influential than Portuguese. To learn, if a student comes to me and says, "Hey, should I learn Spanish or Portuguese?" Well, they won't even ask that question because it's not an issue. You learn Spanish if you're going to be more versatile. Okay, so Latin American cultures, and now geographically, Mexico is considered part of North America, but that's because of the geographic connection. But culturally, okay, it is definitely Latin America. Remember, that's true of Egypt. Egypt geographically is North Africa, but politically it is the Middle East. So, that happens. And Mr. Horner talks about this in his geography. Anybody had geography with Mr. Horner in geography class? He talks about this, that how you identify a country can depend on whether you're speaking geographically or politically, or even religiously sometimes. Okay, so there it is. Argentina, the second biggest country in Latin America. But something I learned through the Flink brothers that I never knew before is that the country that extends the farthest south, closest to Antarctica, is Chile. And I even asked them, is it okay to pronounce it Chile? They said, yeah, it's no problem. Some people like to say Chile, be a little more Spanish about it, but but they're fine. So Chile, I mean, and Chile is just an amazing country, just so razor thin, but it actually goes down closer to Antarctica than Argentina does. Yeah. How many of you have been to a Latin American country? Where at?
Peru.
Yeah, Peru.
Peru and Mexico.
Peru and Mexico? Okay. Yeah. I have not. I've been to Mexico, Peru, and Brazil, and that's it. And there's lots and lots of places, even in Brazil, I've never been to. My wife and I are planning to go down to Curitiba, where the Farlows are, to do a week-long module down there, because Dr. Munford Kober was supposed to, and he had to cancel. So I said, well, if you can use this, then we'll come. And that's right around down here. And right here where that little finger is coming in right there is where Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay all come together. And the Iguazu Falls are down there. Beautiful. If you look up Iguazu Falls online, it's just mammoth. And so we're going to take a little, we're going to actually start there, and the followers are going to meet us there. We're going to spend a couple days there and then go back to Curitiba to do the module. So if you take a missions trip, you got to do a little tourism, right? That's part of the experience. So yeah, there's a little closer view. I guess I should have put that one up sooner. It gets really, you talk about Chile it gets really jagged down here, so it's kind of hard to see it all anyway. It looks like a scorpion's tail. So there are similarities between Latin Europe and Latin America. So what are the differences? Well, you can expect differences because, for one thing, you're talking about two sides of the equator. There's a lot of distance geographically between. One is very much, this area here is very much a hot climate, right? As you read in your book. Okay, what's the title of the book? Foreign to Familiar. It compares hot and cold climates. And here, look at the size difference in size as well. It's amazing. So the main differences are in the areas of geography and history. Okay? So let's talk about it a little bit. Latin Europe is the cradle of Christianity. Now, does that sound kind of weird to you? I mean, could you take issue with that statement if you wanted to, and you can?
Is it talking about Latin Europe including Israel? Or is it talking more about Catholicism?
Yeah, you could go either way with that, Delaney, right? Because remember, if Israel is part of the Latin European cluster, then yeah, Christianity began there. But some people probably use that statement more in reference of when Christianity became the accepted religion of the Roman Empire. Everybody was baptized into Christianity. That's probably more what people have in mind. Okay. Latin America was populated by indigenous people who were separated from one another. But look, that's also true of the United States, right? When the settlers, the Brazilians, when the Pilgrims, the Puritans, they all came to America, it was a similar situation. They were invading, if you will, a region that was inhabited by indigenous peoples, okay? And many of them largely separated from one another. Latin Americans were less mobile than Europeans. Their tendency was to settle into areas and stay. Part of that is because of wars. Europe is laden with a history of war. And so because of those wars and everything, boundaries change, people move, and all that. That's not so much the case in Latin America. So the tendency to be mobile was less in Latin America. Post-World War II conditions were very different. In fact, many countries in Latin America took a neutrality position during World War II. They just didn't want to be involved. I do know that over here in Natal, where actually where Rachel and Rebecca their dad serves, over here, actually it was Recife. It would be very near where they were. There was the Brazilians did give the Allied forces permission to land there on their way to Africa. There was stuff going on in Africa during the war as well, landing points and things. But that's about as far as they got involved in World War II. Okay. All right. So, do we call this area Latin America? Is it even right to refer to it? I mean, let me ask you, what's the problem? Is the problem the word Latin, or is the problem the word America? If you're a native of Latin America, Mexican, Brazilian, Peruvian, whatever, would you take issue with either of those terms? Latin or America?
Would the problem be Latin because it's connecting them to Spain?
Okay, yeah, in some cases, yes. In fact, in Brazil, you want to call somebody an idiot? El português. They say, ele é português legítimo. That means he's a legitimate, a real deal Portuguese. Portuguese as is from Portugal. So if you want to slam somebody, you call them a Portuguese, somebody from Portugal. And yeah, and a lot of the countries also look at Spain as being, kind of the brunt of jokes sometimes. They want to be their own people. They don't want to be tied to something else. Do you think they enjoy being called Americans? Well, it depends. I remember in the classroom one time in Brazil, I was talking to somebody about, the difference between, I'm an American, you're Brazilian. And one of my students raised his hand and said, Pastor Mark, he said, you're a North American and we're Latin Americans. And he was telling me, and the class pretty much agreeing with him, that they like to be called Americans too. I mean, where did the word America come from? Get your history. Where did it come from? Yeah, a guy named America, who most of us don't know very little about. We know Christopher Columbus, and some of those guys, but Amerigo Vespucci, he was an Italian guy, as a lot of the explorers were. Well, so was Columbus, for that matter, right? No, Columbus. Okay, here goes Columbus was he Portuguese? Oh dear, getting myself in hot water. But Vespucci was an Italian guy, and the name America came from him. And so you don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes what's right. Latins consider themselves Americans. So we're not the only ones who are Americans. So I learned in Brazil to refer to myself as a Norte-Americano, a North American, rather than just an American. Now, they will talk about the Americanos, and they're referring to us. But when I was speaking culturally, I would refer to myself as a North American. They don't like to be called Latin Americans, and Delaney, I think you nailed it on the head there, because they don't want to be associated with. It's kind of like we don't have a problem with it now, talking about being English, speaking English. But it took quite a long time after the Revolutionary War for Americans to even mention Britain. I mean, George Washington said, I'll never ever set foot in England again. And so when the British decided to make a statue in honor of George Washington, you heard the story, right? They actually imported American soil and put that on the ground and put the statue on top of the American soil so that they could honor his request never to be present physically or via a statue in England. Crazy. But it was a big deal. Some Latin American customs are extreme expressions of Latin European traits. Okay? For example, paternalism. Now, the Latins do it a little differently. Can you think of a word that we have brought over into English that really speaks of the male dominance in that culture? What's the word we use? It's actually from from Spanish, macho, right? And we talk about machismo, which is machoism, and it is a real thing. It is a real thing, paternalism, and again, that's not just parents, that's talking about the male. And unfortunately, this is abused among many Latin Americans. There are a lot of cases where if a man is a businessman and he travels, for example, the wife just expects that he has other women, out there wherever he travels. And she doesn't like it, but what am I going to do about it? See, it's just part of them. Not everybody, obviously, but it does happen. The role of government, okay. Let's see how far I'm going to go here with this. Okay, I'll do one more. The role of government, it's kind of like the French idea that, why would you guys not want father government to, why are you trying to be such rebellious kids? And then gender roles. I don't know how the gender movement here in the States is impacting South America right now, Latin America. I don't know. But gender roles have been pretty well defined. Okay, hey, we'll come back, do more on Wednesday. Thank you.